Good evening and welcome to Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz Entertainment in Canada around the world. My name is Tahir I. Qureshi. I'm your host. Tonight we have a very special guest, Gerald Tostowaryk. Hopefully I spelled your last name okay. So he's from Edmonton, Alberta, joining us. Our topic of today is analyzing revenue generating properties. So welcome, Gerald. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself for 2 minutes about yourself, your experience, background, and what you do for a living there.
Thank you, Tahir. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me as a guest. It's a pleasure. Again, my name is Gerald Tostowaryk, and I'm a real estate agent with Century 21 Urban Realty, part of the Century 21 Canada Commercial Group. I've been a licensed real estate agent for close to 30 years, and I do a lot of small to medium-sized investor work with investors in the multifamily and retail revenue properties. And I'm also an instructor for the Real Estate Institute of Canada. I hold their Fellow of the Real Estate Institute designation. I'm also a certified commercial investment member. You're probably familiar with the CCIM Institute. So that's a bit about me, my friend.
Wonderful. Viewers, as you know, the investing in real estate can generate capital gain and rental income. So it's very, very important to discuss this in details. Especially tonight, we're going to talk about multifamily and retail investment real estate properties. So Gerald, what do you think? What is the first thing that you look into when you are talking about selecting a investment property?
Okay. Well, actually, the first thing we do is we have a sit down with a client and try and figure out their goals, try and figure out their budget, and get a better feel for where they're at and where they want to be. But then when we start looking, one of the first things we do is when we're looking for properties is look at the area first. There's several things that we look for in areas that are up and coming trends. For example, obviously you want to look at the direction of the neighborhood. Is it in decline? Is it improving? Is it a mature neighborhood? Is it central? Those kinds of things. Then we look at the zoning specific issues for the properties. What are the potentials for the future? If you have a retail property, then you've got to look at things like tenant mix. You want to get tenants that complement each other business-wise, so there can be opportunities for cross-business. And obviously, I can't talk about everything in the time frame we have today, but one thing we also want to talk about that's not so much multifamily, but more with the retail is parking requirements. For example, you want to make sure the tenants have complementary parking needs. For example, restaurants are going to have a great demand of parking during the breakfast time, lunch time, supper time. So you don't want other tenants that also need lots of parking those hours of day. And speaking of parking, yes.
A question I have for you about investment property, is it not all about income?
Gosh,
versus the price appreciation as a secondary, for example? When you're looking into selecting a property, are you not looking into income as a main reason for selecting a property or location?
Actually, well, yes and no. Yes, once we get through the preliminary steps, income is probably one of the last things that we look at. You can be fooled by the income. If it's got really good income and it's a really good price and you're getting a really good deal, then you want to look a lot harder because there's something you're missing. So it's really the last thing we look at. But then when we look at it, it's very important. And we're actually going to talk about income. I imagine we'll talk about income in a bit here. I'll talk about different ratios.
Yes.
One interesting thing, a real big trend to watch for, two trends actually that are coming together. One trend that's very big across North America is transit-oriented development. And with increasing density, properties that are close to transit tend to find better appreciation and value, easier to find tenants and such. But also, our city, Edmonton, I believe, is the first city in North America that has just removed all parking restrictions. We have no
Wow.
parking restrictions, yes. And their reasoning behind it is business people are better decision makers regarding their needs of their property than bureaucrats. So, you know, the world's changing a lot with higher densities and people going to rapid transit and such. So they're letting the business people work out their parking needs. So there's a trend that's coming to watch for. Another trend to watch for that's related directly to transit-oriented development and parking is walkability. Many cities across North America are going to more walkable cities. So these are some of the things we look for when someone's looking for an investment property. These are signs of a good area to be in for the future.
So basically, you are saying that now when we are selecting a property, I want you to give my viewers some thought about real estate market analysis when you're doing analysis, selecting a property versus competitive market analysis. You know, when we are doing CMAs, and there is a difference between real estate and market analysis. What you're talking about is market analysis based on what's going on around the area, and transit is a key because you're focused on investment property because mostly investment property requires income, and so you need the demographic that will be in the area where you want to rent it, because those investment properties are basically rent generating or income generating properties, correct?
Yes, and these factors are very important for both multifamily and retail, because with an increasing reliance on rapid transit, and interestingly, this is a side topic, but there was a report came out. There's a website that talks about investment in commercial real estate. You're probably familiar with it, renx.ca, renx.ca. And there was a new report that came out on that website today that properties that cities that have more reliance on transit were hit a little harder by COVID, but that's another story. But anyway, so for multifamily and for retail, multifamily tenants often use the bus a lot, the rapid transit, so you need to be close to transit. And retail, a lot of customers nowadays more and more are not driving, they're taking the bus. So those are just, there's many factors to looking at a property. We're only talking about a few today.
Yeah, so what are the major factors that you can list that you consider when you are selecting a property for investment? If we are multi-purpose, then we talk about retail. What are the major factors that you consider when you are making recommendation to your clients?
Well, obviously, the major factor goes back to what you said earlier. It has to be good value. You have to pay an appropriate price for the income you're receiving. But one factor I tell all clients, I deal mainly with small to medium-sized clients. So one of the things I tell them is when we're looking at properties and we're deciding which properties you want to go for the one that minimizes your vacancy risk. For example, let's say you've got $3 million, $4 million to spend, $5 million, what have you, right? Well, yes. Now in Toronto, it's going to be a lot different than here, right? But here, you know, you could get 25, 30 multifamily units for that price, or you might get 5 or 6 retail units. So with a retail building, sometimes it's nice to have a retail building. You can drive by the main street and say, that's my building. But when you've only got 5 or 6 units in one building, you have a higher vacancy risk. And retail takes longer to fill a space. Whereas with multifamily, if you have 30 units, you have much less vacancy risk. And when they do become vacant, they're generally quicker to fill up. So that's one of the main things we want to mitigate is vacancy risk. And we're seeing that now in Alberta, where that's becoming quite an issue. So that's one of the main things, other than, of course, return on investment over the long term. And to do that, we got to get into direct analysis ratios. I don't know if you want me to get into that yet, or
Sure, please go ahead. Mention it.
Okay. So when we've narrowed down our list to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 properties, then you want to analyze it for the income, because that's the whole purpose behind a revenue property, right? Is to earn income. So one of the first measurements people will often use is what's called a gross revenue or gross income multiplier.
Yes.
And a gross income multiplier, as you're familiar with,
Yes.
is what you call a down and dirty measurement. It's a real quick measurement. So somebody presents you with a property and you want to decide, am I going to go even look at this property? A gross income multiplier is a quick way of saying, well, you know what? The price is in the ballpark. Let's go have a look. But it's not much. It's not good for much more than that. It's too simplistic a number to use. That's a number to start with. You know, when you're looking at 5 different ones and you want to do a quick look at which are most important, that's a great way to start. And all you do is you take the gross income and you multiply it by a factor, which in our area can often be 10 to 12, depending on the type of property. So that's a gross revenue multiplier. Then the other one that we're all familiar with, is used quite a lot, is the capitalization rate.
Yeah.
And capitalization rate is much better than a gross income multiplier, but it's not the best, right? So a capitalization rate is looking at the net income and applying a multiplier to it based on the price versus the income. And then you get what's called a capitalization rate, which is kind of like a rate of return.
Yes.
And in the Edmonton area right now, depending on the type of property, capitalization rates are anywhere from 4.5% to 6.5% for most properties. I'm talking smaller multifamily retail, but that's changing with COVID and with oil. That's changing a lot, so that we got to watch that. But anyways, so you look at a capitalization rate, and the rule of thumb with capitalization rates is the lower the capitalization rate, the more expensive the property. The higher the capitalization rate, the less expensive the property. In other words, you're paying with a lower capitalization rate, you're paying more money for the same income.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make it a poorer deal? Not necessarily, right? If we're going to a prime area downtown, close to transit-oriented development, close to neighborhood regeneration, close to all sorts of good things, it's going to sell at a lower capitalization rate.
Yeah, this analysis of cap rate is done when you already satisfied with all the other requirement of the building code, bylaws, suitability of the unit for the investment purposes, condition of the property. Everything is analyzed separately, and this is at the final stage of thinking about, or in the beginning, to see whether it's worth exploring this property or not. So you have you got an income, you have vacancy, and you have expenses. You could create an NOI, and then if the people is asking price, divide over the NOI net over the price, it gives you the cap rate, right?
Correct.
So
yeah.
Basically, when you get the cap rate, you reach a point, either you see it in the beginning, whether it's worth exploring the property, provided that the cap rate is 4.55%, whatever that is satisfactory according to the market condition. Then you go to the detail, because mostly they furnish you, or you have to put together this calculation for your cap rate calculation. So normally, do the realtor or the people who are working with you, they give you this information, or do you create? I create my own. Do you do that?
If I understand the question correctly, you're saying, so I'm a buyer and I'm going to a seller. How do I get the information, and when and where? Is that what you're asking? Who furnishes it and such?
Yeah, I'm saying is that when you are helping a buyer to pursue a particular property, but you are doing that calculation to make sure you collect all the information from the listing broker, and then you create your own analysis to come up with a cap rate, and you feel this is satisfactory to go further. Do you do it, or the listing broker provide you that information?
Oh, that's a great question to hear. And you probably know that. You probably know, because the listing broker will generally provide you with all this information. But one of the things I wanted to talk for next, that we're getting ahead, I won't talk about it yet, was things to watch out for. And one of the main things to watch out for is most every set of financial statements is not accurate. There's a couple screwdrivers been put to them, twisted around a little bit this way and that way. And so they usually give us the information, but then we have to really go through it with a fine-tooth comb and reanalyze it. And in a few minutes, we'll talk about some of those things I watch for. But yes, we have to go through them and recreate our own statements that we believe are most accurate and most accurately reflect the property. So, good question there. So, yeah. But that's not the best one. Capitalization rate is a good one, but the limitation of a capitalization rate is the rate is based on 1 year's income. And nobody's buying a property to hold for 1 year, or at least very few people do that. So normally real estate, we buy it to hold it over several years. And so an analysis over several years is the best analysis, and that's what we call a modified internal rate of return, or an internal rate of return, but the modified internal rate of return is, of course, a better one. And from that internal rate of return, we also can get what's called a net present value. And using those two together, we get a really good picture. So, for example, if I'm looking at a revenue property, then we project 5 years into the future. Anything past 5 years is getting a little hard to predict. We predict, what do we think the income will be over the next 5 years? So
you're talking about forecast property price versus the rental expectation?
Sorry, say again, please.
I said the forecasting the property price and rental income expectation in the future.
That's correct. Yes. And you can do this reasonably accurately over a period of, say, 5 years. But the further out in the future we go, the less accurate it gets, of course, where the guesses get harder and harder. But then you forecast every expense that's going to go into that property in 5 years, every income that's going to come out of it. You look at your cost of finance, your borrowing. You look at cash flows. Will you have positive cash flows, negative cash flows? What will you do with those cash flows? And so it provides a very detailed analysis of a property. And then you can take that and apply to it a rate of return, an equity discount rate it's called, which is basically there's three components. There's two components to a capitalization rate. There's the risk-free rate of return, which is a Canada 90-day T-bill rate, and then a risk premium for what you think the risk is associated with this property, and that's what a cap rate's made of. But an equity discount rate goes one step further. Because we're analyzing over 5 years, we have to predict the inflation rate over 5 years and add that in, and that becomes our rate of return against which we measure this property. And so we come up with what's called a net present value. And if you're analyzing several different properties, the property with the highest net present value is likely the best investment.
So you are very mindful of any tax increases and any depreciation of the property?
Absolutely.
In your analysis?
Correct. Yes. So generally my starting point was I'll generally inflate everything at about 2.5% per year based on that as a reasonable assumption for inflation. And then I'll look at it in detail. For example, insurance and taxes, I generally will raise them at a faster rate. Because over the last number of years, they've been going up and up and up. I don't know if you got hit in Ontario, probably the same as us, but multifamily buildings got a huge tax increase. Increase, insurance increase, sorry.
Yeah, we're expecting, I think Municipal Property Assessment Corporation will be doing new assessment this year for the next 4 years. So I think we're due. So potentially, we will have an increase in taxes, definitely.
Hang on to your seats.
Yeah, that's right. So how do you think that when the people are collecting this data about preparing this analysis, what is the source of data that needs to be collected, purchased, or is accessible that you use to create the data because of your expertise and it help a better deal for your client?
Right. Okay, that list is getting longer every year of the things you collect.
Yes.
You know, obviously you want to collect the financial statements for as many years as possible. You want to get a rent roll. So you want to get a list of the tenants that are in there and any documentation relating to their tenancy. If it's, say, for example, whether it's retail or multifamily, you want to see the leases that are in place. And depending on the property, they may need to do an environmental analysis. A lot of governments nowadays are not governments, sorry, the banks are asking for environmental analysis. So there's a lot of there's some of the things that are very, very common you look into in a package. Retail properties get a little more complex, especially with along the environmental lines. You know, you want to check it, municipality, into zoning, into neighborhood renewal if anything's going on. You always want to check and see development permits in the area to see if anything's happening close by or planning on happening close by.
So how do you see the home pricing, a shortage of housing, or tracking the shortage of housing supply and demand affects your ability and also affordability for the consumer, because you are in investment property scenario looking to generate income through rental, and how it will affect if there is a shortage of supply of the houses or demographic or the rental potential is impacting you. And because it all has to do maintaining the price versus rental ratio to make sure your investment is worth doing what you're trying to do to make sure you have an income. If it doesn't generate the income, rental income, then your client will get in trouble. So how do you see supply and demand in the area, demographic and income? Rental income will have influence on your decision making when you're making a recommendation to purchase a property.
Boy, that's a very good question. It makes me think of a few things. I don't know if I'll have time to go through them all, but when it comes to multifamily, Vancouver is a good example of that right now. You know, the market there was so hot for so many years, and they built, and this is actually what I think is an opportunity if you have the staying power. But anyways, I'll talk more about the opportunity in a minute. But to answer your question, Vancouver is very, very hot for very many years. And the central Vancouver, central Toronto, central Edmonton, many cities built a lot of condominiums. The demand was strong. Now that's turned around. They built so many, and the market is turning around. In Vancouver, the cost of owning a condominium in downtown is far higher than renting, and many people are selling their condos. There was an article on the website I just mentioned today, Renex, renx.ca. They just had an article today about that, how a lot of folks in Vancouver are selling because the cost of owning is higher than the cost of renting. So vacancy, or you mentioned the lack of supply, those can have huge factors on the market. Edmonton, for many years, there was not enough supply, and vacancy rates in the multifamily market for a number of years were 1 or 2%, and you literally had. So you have to watch out. You have to definitely watch the trends in vacancy. Another thing that not too many folks do, it's a lot of work, but it's not a lot of work, but it's extra work, but it's a good thing to do, is what's called a location quotient. This is something you have to understand. But if you're buying a retail property, it tells you, you look at the property you're buying, you look at your tenants, and you can go to the Government of Canada, Statistics Canada, and get location quotients for their industry. And it tells you in a nutshell, and I can't explain it in the time we have, it's something you have to research, but in a few minutes it tells you if that area has enough of those businesses, too many, not enough. And so it gives you an insight into the future of those businesses. So location quotient. One thing I wanted to mention, I think now is a good opportunity for long-term investing in the condominium market, residential condominium market. I believe, and I can't get into it in detail, and don't go out and rush out and buy a bunch of condos just because I said this, but I encourage people to look into buying condos because they've been weak for a couple of years. But I think the way our world is going, smaller, more central, higher density living is going to pick up again in the near future. And I think they'll be a good long-term investment. But don't go out and buy one today just on that.
Yeah, I always mention to my clients, residential market, regardless of what property they're buying, is if the carrying cost is lower than the market appreciation or the value of the property that appreciate every year, then it's worth it to sit in and live in that house or live in the property. If appreciation value is less and your cost is more to carrying it, unless you see the historic data that shows that it's been appreciated significantly, and there is always an economy slow period of time when you may have to break even point. But if it's continue to cost you more money, and you just confirm that, if it continue to cost you more money to maintain than you can rent it, obviously is the best thing is to get rid of it or dispose of. And this is, viewers, you have to understand, if you are investing a property and you are not generating a revenue more than what your cost of maintaining that property is, basically you are eating up the equity basically in the property, correct?
Well, that's a great statement to hear, and that actually leads into a good comment that people often look at capitalization rates in their purchases, and that's an important thing. But more important is the spread, the interest rate spread. So today's borrowing rates are incredibly low, and I encourage everyone to really think hard about the possibility of investing now in something, whether it be real estate, stocks, what have you. But the spreads, because the interest rates are so low, the spread between your cost of borrowing and your return can be greater. Doesn't mean it always is, but your comment is, we're kind of talking about the same thing here. The interest rate spread, rate of return versus the cost of borrowing. Yeah. Very, very good point. Very timely point.
Yeah, because it's important to our viewers to understand that because of currently we have a lockdown in Ontario, and we continue to get support from the federal government. They are still giving out $2,000 on a monthly basis, but in the event, if this continues and the vaccine is not available, for God reason, challenges comes in where the federal government support is not available, there will be big challenges for the regular home buyers who are buying a living there. But investment is a risk in a sense that you must have a big pocket to maintain and go through the process. The government has provided some financial support to the corporations who are renting building offices. So we're talking about, I do not know at this moment that the multiple family or multi-houses, is there any support available to the landlord who may have a challenge in this environment? Are you aware of anything in Edmonton?
That's one area, I haven't looked into with the government funding. I haven't actually looked into that, but I am a member of the Alberta Residential Landlord Association, and I don't remember. There very well could be, and you know what? That's something I should have looked into, but I haven't. Yeah. But you made me think of something else that's also a very good point, and that is the Realtors Association of Edmonton had their annual market forecast a couple of weeks ago, and we had CIBC Chief Economist Benjamin Tal present, and he made some very interesting comments with all the government aid that you're talking about. This has been a very, very deep recession, needless to say. The gross domestic product has dropped at its peak, something like 15, 16% in Alberta, but it's going to come back up much quicker. But it's a very deep recession. But because of government aid, there's been people's incomes have actually risen faster than they ever have. And because we can't spend the money because everything's closed, savings have been increasing. So he felt that when the economy comes back, when we get rid of COVID, which he felt the second half of this year, things will start to improve noticeably. He felt it's going to be very strong resurgence. So your mentioning of government support, thank you, made me think of that point. Now, I don't know if can I mention my podcast? I made a podcast on that.
No, I didn't get a chance to watch that, but definitely I'll look into that. Yes, until federal government has subsidized landlord in who are renting big properties. I do not if the multi-family home residential is owned by a corporation, and if there is a decline of rental because they have to maintain the property.
Oh, that's right.
So there is a subsidy available to them, even for the businesses, for the rental, even the charity for the rental. So there is a big program. Our federal governments have a big heart to help economy to make sure we don't go deep into recession. But again, at the end of the day, it's our money that's being given out. So I hope there is accountability. There is going to be a process where people are not cheating or taking advantage of situation, because it's our money being given out. I believe that our federal debt has gone over $1 trillion now, and so us and our children and grandchildren will be paying the interest on those, and we will have less money for the program in the future unless we continue to stimulate the economy and make sure that we are helping to survive. So far, in residential market that I have seen, there are multiple offers buying a single home for investment or residential. If the property value is less than $800,000, there are multiple offers across Ontario that I have seen, and we're experiencing every day. But the question again is the survival. How financially you are strong, how much planning has been done. They have allocated funds for contingency. There are some places where there's insurance program available to make sure that your rental income is subsidized or other than the government. So there are various options available to us. I think we're going to take a small break and we're going to talk about retail afterward. Viewers, you are on Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz Entertainment in Canada, around the globe. We're going to take a short break and then we'll come back. We'll talk about real estate, revenue properties, and retail. Thank you.
Fine Foods, now open in Barhaven area, Ottawa. Pick up or dine in. Also available on Uber Eats, Skip the Dishes, and DoorDash.
$2020 का लाजवाब ऑफर, जहां हम 0% फाइनेंसिंग पर आपकी मनपसंद कार दे रहे हैं, फ्री विंटर टायर्स, और साथ ही हम मुफ्त ऑयल चेंज भी दे रहे हैं, वो भी उम्र भर के लिए। अभी आएं और इस लाजवाब ऑफर का लुत्फ लें। जल्दी करें, आपका खुशामदीद हमारे आउटलेट में, जो कि 60 क्वींस प्लेट ड्राइव एट इंटरसेक्शन क्लोज टू हाईवे 27 एंड रेक्सडेल अपोजिट टू वुडबाइन रेस ट्रैक। जल्द से जल्द इस ऑफर का लुत्फ लें। आज ही कॉल करें सुनील अग्रवाल को 647-703-0218। देखिए खेल की आवाज हर पीर शाम 7 बजे। आज की बात समीना जबीन के साथ हर मंगल रात 8 बजे। इस्लाम इन मॉडर्न टाइम हर मंगल और जुमा शाम 6 बजे। कैनेडियन मोज़ेक हर बुध रात 8 बजे। रियलिटी कॉफी टॉक हर जुमेरात शाम 7 बजे। टुनाइट टॉक हर जुमा शाम 7 बजे। देखिए तकरार, कीजिए तकरार समीना जबीन के साथ हर रोज रात 9 बजे और रिपीट सुबह 9 बजे। आप देख रहे हैं आवाज एंटरटेनमेंट, आवाज आपकी, चैनल हमारा, जुड़िए हमसे।
Good evening and welcome to Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz Entertainment in Canada, around the world. My name is Tostowaryk. I'm your host. Today I have a very special guest, Gerald, with me, where we're talking about analyzing revenue generating properties. So we continue the conversation. You wanted to say something, Gerald?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Tyler. I just wanted to talk a bit about some of the things to watch out for when you're analyzing financial statements from owners. The main thing to watch out for is expenses. Expenses are easier to manipulate than income. It's much harder to play with income because you can look at the leases, you can look at the deposit records, you can talk to tenants. And so generally, if something's going to get manipulated on a financial statement, it'll be expenses. And it's not uncommon. If an owner knows I'm going to sell my building in 2 or 3 years, they might start keeping their expenses a little lower than normal, maybe do a little less maintenance than normal, and things like this or not record some expenses to keep them lower, make it look like it produces more income. So that's one of the things to watch out for, and it's relatively easy to account for that by looking at ratios compared to normal operating ratios and seeing if they match or not. But generally, that'll be at the expense of maintenance. So maintenance items will get neglected that you're going to have to maintain. So, and another one to watch for, this actually can work in your favor. If the seller is an unsophisticated seller, sometimes folks will do very expensive capital projects. And instead of capitalizing that expense over 10 or 15 or 20 years, they might include it in 1 year's income. And so it drops the net income, makes the price lower, which for you is a benefit, right? So those are a couple of things I wanted to mention to watch for in financial statements.
Yeah, they normally do sometime to recover more money in order to generate. If they're looking for more money, they will add management fees a little bit higher to collect more money because they want to build their cash flow, correct?
Things like that and different other things, yes.
This is how because the TMI, is part of that parcel, so they know that it's being passed on to I'm talking about keeping in mind the retails that pass on to the tenant. Therefore, they will add to it something, even though maybe it doesn't justify it. It's not much unless they challenge it and negotiate it. This could be one of those elements because they can always, I see on the smaller retail plazas, the smaller one, they add so much money because one of their family member is also running the snow blowing and HVAC system, thing like that. They will invoice the company, and obviously it becomes a legitimate expense when there is an invoice, right? But these are the things that I think you're talking about, I believe.
And that's a good comment for those that aren't familiar with the term TMI. That's taxes, maintenance, and insurance. And I don't know, in Ontario, we also call it TIMS out here, TIM, or operating costs or CAM costs. So, that's basically the expenses, TMI, taxes, maintenance, insurance.
Yeah, those are the three expenses that over and above the rental that how they get
the utilities.
Income, rental, and they also multiply this factor of TMI based on square footage, whatever is per month for that particular unit, and then you have to add every month you have to pay based on total square footage. So everything is calculated by square footage, and prorated number of units you have, they divide it, and they have fixed factors. So obviously there is a pool of expenses to maintain the property, small or big, and they divide by the square footage of each one to equal that total budget they need to recover and pass it on to the to the realtor. So to the tenant. So that's great. So let's talk about now retail. You wanted to mention something, and we have small time, another 6 minutes to talk about retail. So you want to share something about retail?
Gosh, I've shared a big chunk of it about retail, but here's
Anything that remaining?
probably one of the most important things, which I talked about a little bit. Well, not one of the most important. Well, I guess it is tenant mix. Again, we talked briefly about that, but you want a good tenant mix. You don't want a daycare next to a tattoo parlor, obviously. That's not going to mix well. You want things that work together well. For example, maybe there's a gas station and then maybe there's a chocolate shop nearby or a grocery store or something where they're getting gas. Oh, I'm going to stop and I'm going to get groceries. Then maybe they'll go to the liquor store or something. So watch for good tenant mixes is one of the main things. And retail is changing a lot these days. And if a person can, I suggest looking into the Institute of Real Estate Management. They put out regular reports on trends in real estate, not in real estate, in property management. For example, there's some shopping centers down in the United States that are experimenting with phone ahead parking. Certain stalls are reserved and you phone ahead and you book it. You have to pay for that stall because you're booking it ahead. But there's so many trends in retail. Things are changing a lot these days in retail. And that's just one of many trends. There's so many things to look for, but parking is one that's changing a lot these days.
Well, viewers, you are watching Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz Entertainment in Canada, around the world. We're talking about analyzing revenue properties. Either you are buying a single unit, multi-house, or retail plaza. You need expert real estate professional who have a designation, who can help you, guide you to make a wise decision. There are many factors involved with that affects a price, location, based on demographic, income, government subsidy, government rules, and market trend, excess of properties available, and also taxes implication because of capital gain. There are many, many factors involved. That means you have to select a real estate professional who has a precise training to help you, guide you to make a wise changing. Recession, market ups and downs, fluctuation. Right now, there are best mortgage rate available right now to do the purchasing of real estate. That's why I mentioned that anything below 800,000 is just flying, and multiple offers and competition going on because of market condition. Supply is less, and therefore demand is high. People are trying to move away from the condominium toward the housing. So there are many factors. Environmental is one of the factors. So it all depends what you have chosen to invest and how your real estate profession is guiding you. So Gerald has given you a good input about what to look for. But obviously, when you have a specific need, you want to invest in real estate, you need to call our real estate professional to help you. So I'm going to ask you, Gerald, give you 1 minute to give your contact information, so in case someone is looking for a property, they can contact you before we say our final word.
Sure. Thank you again, Tahir. So, again, my name is Gerald Tostowaryk, and I'm with Century 21 Urban Realty. And my contact information, probably best, my email is a mile long with my last name, so my cell phone is 780-887-3709. But I also do a real estate podcast called The Real World of Real Estate. And you can find it on most any podcast service. It's on Apple, it's on Google, it's on Stitcher, there's so many of them, Podcast Addict. So there you go, my friend.
Thank you very much, Gerald, for joining us on Realty Coffee Talk and Awaz Entertainment. Viewers, you are watching Realty Coffee Talk and Awaz Entertainment. If you are a real estate agent, broker, developer, builder, plumber, electrician, a lawyer involved with real estate, I have negotiated a special price arrangement with you with Awaz Entertainment for live broadcast. So you can talk to them, call the 647-484-0018 and tell them that you got a special, you're connecting because of Realty Coffee Talk. They will give you a very special package that you can broadcast very economically in Canada, around the world. There are about 3.8 or 9 million viewers of Realty Coffee Talk and Awaz Entertainment on social media, on Awaz ENT 580. This live broadcast is going on through at Facebook and also Instagram and also YouTube, and live on Awaz ENT 480 around the globe. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was any help you to understand the investment property, how we analyze them. If you have any specific question, as you know, I'm a real estate broker of record for City Pro Realty Inc. If you want to reach out to me to help you, because it's very important to have one-to-one meetings. So my number is 416-451-3489. My name is Tostowaryk Qureshi. I'm your host. Thank you very much for watching. At this time, we want to take this opportunity to thank our health worker and professional for their dedication and commitment to help our fellow citizens, and our armed forces, our police, safety department, everybody who's involved in helping and serving our fellow citizens. May God bless you all. May God bless Canada. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now. See you next Thursday at 7 p.m. Thank you. Bye for now.